herders in here today? Oh, I see some hands. I didn't see any hands this morning. So, I guess I'm not a third-generation cat herder either. And apparently after the week that we've had, I'm not very good at herding cats at all. But what I have noticed, if you've seen the title for today's sermon, Herding Cats or Shepherding Hearts, what's interesting is that title Mark and I landed on a couple months ago probably, and I realized this week more than ever that God truly has a sense of humor. Does anybody else know that God has a sense of humor? And so, when I am coming up this week, I'm preparing to talk about herding cats. I've had more cat encounters in the past week than I think I have in the last 15 years. And so earlier this week, my wife discovered that behind our shop in a doze pile, we have at least 5, maybe 6, maybe a dozen wild cats that we didn't even know were there. And the reason I don't know how many is because I've not been able to get them all in a big enough bunch at one time to know how many there really are. So apparently, again, I'm not very good at herding cats. And then yesterday, we stopped by my mother and father's house and talked to them. And my mom says pretty quickly, I think we have a problem. Well, usually when mom says that, that means I have a problem. And there's a problem that I might have to help deal with, or that we as children might have to help deal with. And thankfully I had a couple friends there, and they braved the cats with us. But Mom and Dad had 2 mama cats, and they had gotten under their house somehow and into the subfloor. And in the subfloor, they both had a litter of kittens. Oh. And so, I appreciate Harry and Christy coming and braving the cats, and we were able to go under, and we had to cut insulation underneath the subfloor of the house and dig around, and we had to listen for these kittens to meow so that we could search and find them, and finally, we found one of the mama's kittens. But we never found the other litter, and so I don't know what's going to happen next, but right now there's still a litter of kittens in my mother and father's subfloor under their house. But so many cat encounters this week, and I'm not a very good cat herder. But growing up, I know my mother had to wonder whether she was herding cats or shepherding hearts. Because there were many times with 3 boys and 1 girl that life was interesting and life was chaotic. And we might have mostly not always done what we were told. You guys ever been victim to that? Okay. Have you guys ever been that? Okay, I have. All right, and I admit it openly today because my parents are sitting here, and so I have to be honest. I have to be honest today. But the thing is, there were questions that spoke to the title of this sermon series that my mother would often ask. And remember, the title of our series is The Long Journey to Raising Humans All the Way. And sometimes it feels like a long journey. And the questions my mother would ask often when she was a tad frustrated were things like, Larry, are we ever going to get these children raised? Have you guys ever asked that question before if you're a parent? Sometimes, I know I've asked it. I admit it. I've asked that question. Larry, where did you pick up these monkeys from? Is there any return policy at the zoo? Okay, so there were times when we deserved those questions being asked. And I openly admit that we deserved it. So why is it that we often feel like we're herding cats? Like things are out of control, like we don't know which direction to steer those that we lead, those that we're responsible for. Why is that? Well, have you ever told a cat not to do something? How did that work for you? Did they listen? Have you ever told a child not to do something? All right. How often do they listen? Well, I have 4 children, and maybe half the time. I don't know. Many times they're much better than that. The percentages are higher, but how often when I'm told not to do something, there's something in my best interest, and I'm supposed to be steered the other direction, how often do I listen? How often do we listen when we're told not to do something? Because the truth is, we just went on and did it anyway. And then a lot of the times we were proud of it until Mom and Dad found out. And then it might have changed a little bit, and we learned for a little while, but not that long, and then we went back and did the same thing again. Because we didn't learn very quickly. I didn't learn very quickly. Now, growing up, our two oldest were about 4 and 3 years old, and it's hard to have conversations, really solid conversations with a 3 and a 4-year-old about what not to do. You talk to them about not using markers on anything but paper. All right, but when they're 4 and 3 and you talk to them about not using markers on anything but paper, it doesn't really last that long. So we had gone through the entire house and we had hidden all the markers and we had secured everything that we could find and thought we had done a really great job hiding all the markers. And one day, they're off playing in one end of the house and it gets quiet. And that's when the sense of dread comes. Because when it got quiet when the kids were playing, that usually meant they were up to no good and doing something they shouldn't do. And so at that point, we go to search that end of the house to try and find our 2 daughters. And we find them shut in our guest bathroom, which is all white. White walls, white doors, white tub and shower, white cabinets. I mean, pretty much everything is white until they got a hold of it. Somehow they found permanent markers that were hidden, and there were murals in black permanent marker all over everything. So we do what we know, what we're told not to do. It's just a fact of life. It's not just my children. It wasn't just me. We all do things we're told not to do because we're infamous for it. But you see, the problem is we as humans, we have a heart condition. We have a heart problem. There's a problem with our hearts that dictates many times our actions. So, before we move on, we need to see, I got my notes out of order. We need to see what this heart condition really is and frame this discussion, this topic this morning correctly. Because in the Old Testament book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23, the author reveals something to us about the condition of our hearts, how the Jewish people thought of the word heart when they used it in their everyday language and context. Because in this verse it says, guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. Guard your heart above all else. But when he referred to guarding our hearts, he wasn't referring to the heart that we think of. He wasn't referring just to our physical, muscular heart in the center of our chest that pumps blood to the rest of our body to help sustain physical life. That's not what he was simply referring to. Because he goes on to say, guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. In the New Testament, Matthew, who is a tax collector, turned follower of Jesus, says something else about the heart. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, in that sentence, in that verse, I don't believe that he's speaking to our physical heart, that wherever our treasure is, wherever we place our time and our talents and our finances and all the things that we treasure, that we desire, that our physical heart is going to be there. It's going to be removed and placed wherever our money is. No, that's not what he's talking about, is he? He's not talking about our physical heart. So in the Old Testament and New Testament, we learn that the Jewish people had a much deeper, broader understanding of the heart. They understood that the heart, when they spoke of it, it was the very source of life. That the heart was the source of your intelligence, our reasoning, our emotion, that it was the source of everything that we are. It was our very soul. So in the New Testament Greek, when they would use the word cardia, it referred to the condition of our soul, our very being. In the Old Testament, when they would use the word lev to indicate heart, it would refer to all that we are in thought, emotion, speech, action, where everything flows from. And that was their belief and understanding of the word heart when they used it. So if it is the very source of life, with that in mind, and we again say, guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life, it gives a different meaning to it. And it gives a deeper meaning to it. So today, let's guard our hearts. So why often does it feel like herding cats instead of shepherding hearts? Well, in the Old Testament, the prophet Jeremiah spoke something very bluntly. And he didn't hold back. He spoke something very bluntly about the condition of your heart. And he spoke something very bluntly about the condition of my heart. And it's pretty shocking when we hear it and we really take it to heart. We understand what he's really saying. Because in the Old Testament, Jeremiah in chapter 17, verse 9, says, the heart is more deceitful than anything else. The heart is more deceitful than what? Anything. Anything else. I mean, I think I could have come up with a better list than he did. I mean, surely there are more things that are more deceitful than my heart, than who I am, than my very soul. Surely I could have come up with a better list than Jeremiah did, but he goes on to say that it is uncurable, and how can anyone understand it? Jeremiah very bluntly tells us that our hearts are broken. They're broken beyond repair. There's nothing that we can do on our own. There's no device that we can devise. There's nothing that we can shape our hearts into of our own accord. Our hearts are deceitful above anything else and beyond cure. So I hate to break it to you this morning. This is a statement that we used some in our house with kids growing up. Your heart is cold. Your heart is cold. My heart is cold. Our hearts are not worthy to be followed because they are deceitful. So if our hearts are not worthy to be followed, and right now I know some of you are thinking, but Pastor, my heart isn't that bad. I'm not that bad a person. Well, it's not about being a bad person. It's just about who we truly are at the root that Jeremiah is getting to. Apart from the good shepherd, our heart is deceitful and beyond cure. And that leads us to this statement, the fact that our hearts cannot be trusted to lead. My heart can't be trusted to lead. I can't trust my heart to tell me what to do. Our hearts can't be trusted to lead because they must be led. Because of the condition that they're in, our hearts must be led. Last week, I received a text message. And in this text message, it simply said, desire to find your true self, find out who you really are, take this survey, and find out your true self in just a few minutes. And that was a message that I received. And man, did I think, wow, I'm excited. I can really find out who I really am, what I should really do, who my true self is, what heart I'm supposed to follow in just a few minutes. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. Because our hearts are beyond cure, deceitful above all else. And so I cannot find my true self. I cannot find my purpose within my own soul, within my own heart, within my own being, within who I choose or think I want to be. It's not going to happen. And if we begin to decide to follow the desires of our hearts, we may go a while, but we're going to be disappointed. And we're going to be broken. And it's not going to end very well. So what are we allowing? Who or what are we allowing to shepherd our hearts? Are we allowing our culture to speak into and define what our hearts should be? Are we allowing our culture to shape the direction of our life, our very goals, who we are day to day, who our children are, who those we lead are to become? Do we want our culture to shepherd our hearts? Hopefully not. Our peers, do we want our peers and our family members to be the sole source of the shepherding, the guidance, the direction of our very lives and our hearts? No, we don't. Do we want ourselves, our own opinions and desires, to be the shepherds, the sole shepherds of our hearts? Absolutely not. not according to God's word. To these men who followed God in the Old and New Testament, our hearts are not worthy to be followed. They're not worthy to shepherd who we should become. So this morning, would you turn with me in John chapter 10? I'm going to start reading in verse 1. And this morning, we're going to look at an example of a shepherd. We're talking about shepherding hearts and this notion that to shepherd hearts, we can't do it on our own. And we can't follow our own desires or devices. And so in John chapter 10, verse 1, there's a comparison of a shepherd to one in authority. And in the Old Testament alone, there are over 90 comparisons of people in authority, leaders, whether of the country, of the nation of Israel, of the church in the Old Testament, whether leaders of the household, parenting. There are over 90 references and comparisons of shepherds to people in those positions of authority. But today we're going to look at what I believe is the ultimate comparison of a shepherd. And so let's read, beginning in John chapter 10, verse 1. It says, "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep." So here we have this example, this image of a sheep pen, which is going to be on the screen for you to see what a sheep pen looked like in ancient Israel. And so in Israel, a sheep pen was a little different than we think of. It was a pile of rocks, usually in a circle or some kind of square or rectangle that would be made into the shape of a pen that could contain sheep. Now, the thing we have to understand about the shepherd at the time was that the shepherd did not care for the sheep in the way we think of someone caring for their animals. Because many times someone caring for their animals today is going to go out and check them in the morning or check them a couple times a day and make sure everyone is there and present, everyone is safe, no one's sick or injured, and then they go about their day. But the shepherd in ancient Israel, the shepherd that they understood and knew, was committed 24 hours a day to his sheep. Because the shepherd would live with his sheep, literally, being out in the pastures all day long, hours on end, leading them from grass, to greener grass, to new pastures, leading them to cleaner waters, or finding and fulfilling their needs. But they would live with the sheep, resting on rocky ground, sleeping where the sheep slept. But then the interesting part about all this is that when they brought the sheep into the pen at night, what do you not see? There's no gate, is there? There is no gate on this sheep pen. And so read along with me a little bit farther. I'm going to reread verse 2. It says, "The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers." When Jesus says here, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep, there is no gate on this sheep pen, and we might think, well, maybe it was built of wood and it deteriorated over the years and it was lost, and the gate is just missing. But that is not the case. If we continue reading in verse 6, it says, "Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them." They didn't understand the analogy that Jesus was making. And he says again in verse 7, "Truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. He will find what he needs. A thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." Thing is, Jesus was the gate. Literally, in ancient shepherding cultures, there was not a physical gate. The shepherd would lay himself down, his body, across the opening of the sheep pen, and that is where he would sleep, becoming the gate, becoming the only thing protecting his sheep at night from those animals that would come in and seek to kill and steal and destroy. The shepherd is the gate, and Jesus is our gate, our source of protection, as well as many other things. So, if we ask the question, how do we shepherd the hearts that God entrusted us? First, we must do what the sheep did. They knew the voice of the Good Shepherd, and they would listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd. The only way we can know the voice of the Good Shepherd is to know the shepherd himself. And so when we ask the integrity question, am I being honest with myself really? Am I being honest with myself that I truly know the voice of my shepherd? Do I spend time with Jesus? Do I model time with Jesus to my children? At times, I succeed, and at many times, I fail. Now, we go on to ask, beyond am I really being honest with myself, am I really being honest with God? Because just like our hearts are deceitful, sometimes I believe I can deceive God. Am I really being honest with God? Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist, and he wrote a statement, a quote, that I think speaks to this very well. His childhood was very troubled, and his father was a pastor, but he struggled with his father's relationship because his father didn't always practice what he spoke, what he preached. His mother had mental illness, and so Jung struggled with the image of parents. And he said, the child is educated by what the grown-up is, not by his talk. And so our children recognize who we are, not just what we say, and we know this, but who do I want my children to be? Is it who they see? Who do I want my children to be? Is it really who they see? And so we ask ourselves this question. Is it who I want them to be when they see me directing my finances, when they see me in my personal life, in my attitude, in my relationship with Jesus? In order to shepherd hearts, our hearts must first be shepherded. Then we ask the maturity question. After we submit ourselves to this prayer in Psalm 51, verse 10, that says, God, create a clean heart for me and renew a steadfast spirit within me. So if we want to improve in our integrity and who we are all the time, we ask God to create a clean heart within us. And then we ask the maturity question. If we want to shepherd those that we lead, what is the wise thing to do? Is this decision today the wise thing to do? But then we add, what does God's word say to do? Because remember, if I simply ask of myself, if we simply ask of ourselves, what is the wise thing to do, then more than likely our hearts are going to lead us astray. So we compare it with what God would say for us to do. If we want our children to be mature and self-reliant, people who grow up mature in their relationship with Christ, how are we spending our time? How are we spending our finances? How are we spending those things that they see us treasuring? So we ask the integrity question, we ask the maturity question, and then finally we become a shepherd, not a sheepdog. Now, when we become a shepherd, not a sheepdog, it's the fact that a sheepdog controls the movements of the sheep, but a shepherd leads his sheep. Leads them in his actions and in his words and his speech, leads them with his very life. And so as a parent, I haven't always succeeded. Sometimes I fail miserably at leading my children with my life as a shepherd. Sometimes I'm guilty of chasing cats and just trying to control the movements of my children from day to day because life is stressful. Parenting children is a long journey, and sometimes it's difficult. And so sometimes I can be guilty of chasing cats and just controlling movements. But remember, a shepherd leads his sheep to what they need, not necessarily what they want. That smartphone plan, it may not be necessary at this point. The thing that they want to do on the weekend may be okay to say no to. There are many times we're going to have to create boundaries for our children, as a shepherd created boundaries for his sheep, because we know that in the long run, it's what's best for them. It's what's safest for them. It's what will keep them from harm and direct them to become who we want them to become. A shepherd knows his sheep, and his sheep know him. And during the rest of this series, Pastor Mark is going to give us some great tools to spend our time and our treasure and show our children how to spend time in our relationship with the Lord and spend time in Scripture. And so those resources are going to be available soon. So begin this week. Let us all begin shepherding our hearts so that we can shepherd the hearts of our children. There's a shepherding myth. And in this shepherding myth, there was a shepherd who had a large flock, and I don't believe that it's true. It should just be a myth. But he would shepherd this flock from day to day. And he was a good shepherd, because he was a shepherd who would go out with his flock, and he would spend the time necessary with his flock, never leaving them alone, unless it was to go off to the next pasture to look for the greenest grass, to look for something that they were in need of. And then he would lead them by calling them, and they would recognize his voice. He was a good shepherd. And this shepherd one day had several sheep who, well, their hearts were deceitful. And their hearts continued to lead them astray, and they would go off thinking they could find greener pastures than the shepherd had provided. They would go off thinking they could find cleaner, clearer, cooler waters than the shepherd had led them to. And they would go off on their own, putting themselves at risk repeatedly. And the shepherd would go day after day and find his sheep, pick them up, and bring them back to his flock. Bring them back to the protection of the sheep pen. But one day the shepherd realized that the sheep would never listen. They would never listen on their own, that the sheep would continue to do what he had said not to do, and there would be a need for something to change. And so the shepherd took his rod, the shepherd's staff that he used to guide and shepherd the sheep, and he broke one of the sheep's legs. And in this myth, it says that the shepherd broke the leg of the sheep who kept wandering off continuously in order so that he could carry the sheep and the sheep be near to him, because it was better that the sheep's leg was broken than the sheep risk danger for its life, that the life would be lost. It was better for that consequence to occur. But what I am so thankful for today is that Jesus was not like that shepherd. Jesus knew that I was broken. And Jesus knew that my heart was deceitful beyond all else, beyond cure. And instead of that form of discipline, which we still all need discipline. I need it daily. I need to be corrected. But instead of that form of discipline, Jesus became the sacrifice himself. Jesus became the broken sheep. And he laid down his life, broken for each and every one of us, because we were beyond cure. And so today, before we can shepherd anyone, before we can shepherd ourselves or allow ourselves to begin being shepherded, I believe that we have to know the Good Shepherd. And we have to have a relationship with the Good Shepherd. And so today, I'd ask you to stand with me, and we're going to go ahead and pray. But if you have not accepted Jesus as your Good Shepherd, accepted him and asked him to forgive you of this incurable heart, then this is the time to do so. If there's anything that you need to come and pray over, there are areas in your life that you want Jesus to help you in shepherding those you lead, shepherding your children, shepherding some employees at work, shepherding other family members, then come and pray, and you're not alone, and someone will pray with you. Let's go to God in prayer this morning.